If I accept responsibility for something that went wrong, I must confront the possibility that I am wrong. I made a poor decision, that I reacted emotionally when I should have remained calm, that I misjudged someone, that I contributed to the situation that I'm now complaining about. That is what people find uncomfortable because it threatens their identity. So instead of responsibility, the ego reaches for something easier. Blame is one of the most powerful psychological defense mechanisms human beings possess. And how many of us know those people who are always playing the victim card, always crying that they have been done by hardly by others? It allows a person to explain failure without damaging their self image. Blame protects pride, but it comes with a hidden cost. Blame protects your ego today, but it steals your power for tomorrow. Because the moment you blame everyone else, you surrender control over your own life. And you're failing to take responsibility. And you are just saying that all these other people are to blame for your failure. And the moment you do that, the moment you're surrendering control to these other people and not taking responsibility, you can see these patterns emerge clearly in relationships. Many of you have been following this series of the ego psychology over the many weeks that we have been running this now, and you'll start sort of seeing patterns emerging of behavior, and maybe you see your own self in those patterns of behavior. You can see, oh, I act like that. Oh, this is something I do in terms of my reaction. So one of the things that we want to talk about today is about people who play the victim card. These are people who hate responsibility. This is why they always take out the victim card, play the victim card, should I say. But most people say that they want to control their lives, they want better relationships, better careers, better health, better outcomes. They want to believe that their effort matters and their decisions shape the direction of their future. But something interesting happens the moment responsibility appears. The moment a situation demands that we look honestly at our own role in what has gone wrong, the mind becomes uncomfortable, very uncomfortable. Instead of moving towards responsibility, the ego moves away from it. It searches for explanations that protect identity. It looks for narratives that preserve the image that we have of ourselves. And this is where one of the most powerful distortions of the ego appears. The ego hates responsibility, not because responsibility is painful in itself, but because responsibility threatens the story we tell ourselves about who we are. If I accept responsibility for something that went wrong, I must confront the possibility that I am wrong. I made a poor decision, that I reacted emotionally when I should have remained calm, that I misjudged someone, that I contributed to the situation that I'm now complaining about. That is what people find uncomfortable because it threatens their identity. So instead of responsibility, the ego reaches for something easier. Blame. Blame is one of the most powerful psychological defense mechanisms human beings possess. And how many of us know those people who are always playing the victim card, always crying that they have been done by hardly by others? It allows a person to explain failure without damaging their self image. Blame protects pride, but it comes with a hidden cost. Blame protects your ego today, but it steals your power for tomorrow. Because the moment you blame everyone else, you surrender control over your own life. And you're failing to take responsibility. And you are just saying that all these other people are to blame for your failure. And the moment you do that, the moment you're surrendering control to these other people and not taking responsibility, you can see these patterns emerge clearly in relationships. Imagine a married couple who have been married, let's say, for 10, 15 years. When they first met, everything felt natural. They spoke openly, laughed easily, and admired each other's qualities. Friends describe them as a strong couple, but over time something subtle begins to change. At first it was the small things. I want you to focus on this because this is where a lot of people will recognize the pattern of their own relationship, marriage, where maybe the relationship has deteriorated over a period of time. And ultimately, for some, maybe you have a divorce behind you, maybe a relationship which once had all the hallmarks of passion, excitement, love, romance, then dwindled into nothingness, which ended in divorce. So let's analyze how people get to that stage. So, first, it's the small things, a sarcastic remark here and there, a dismissive comment here and there, a forgotten promise, a conversation that ended in irritation instead of understanding. So, none of these moments felt serious on their own, but each one created a small emotional bruise. Years pass, and those bruises accumulate and they never heal. The husband begins to feel that his efforts are not appreciated. The wife begins to feel that her concerns were never taken seriously. You recognize that? It seems like it's a common story. Both of them feel misunderstood, and gradually each of them develop a quiet story about the other. The husband's story becomes very simple. My wife is always critical. Nothing I do is good enough. The wife begins to think that my husband never listens. He dismisses everything that I say. So once these stories are formed and they become part of everyday interaction, that's how the whole mindset starts shaping into resentment. If the husband comes home late from work, the wife interprets it as proof that he did not care about the family. If the wife raised a concern, the husband interprets it as a criticism. Neither of them realize what was happening, but a pattern started forming. Each person was interpreting reality through a different lens, which was forming their own narrative, which was protecting their ego and their version of the story. Instead of asking, what is my role in this whole tension? How have I contributed? Both are asking, why is the other one being so difficult? Blame slowly replaced curiosity. And when blame replaces curiosity, growth stops. The ego loves the victim story because if you are always the victim, you never have to take responsibility, and the onus is not on you to change. It's the other person who's got a problem. They have to change. So the one spouse is always thinking the problem is with the other spouse. They need to change. So let's say one evening, a married couple have an argument that followed a pattern that had become very familiar. The wife tried to explain that she felt emotionally unsupported. The husband immediately defended himself. I work hard for this family, he says. You're always complaining. She replies with frustration. You never listen to what I'm actually saying. Within minutes, the conversation collapses into the same cycle that has been repeating for dozens and dozens of times previously. Defensiveness, frustration, silence. Both of them walk away feeling that the other person was unreasonable. And that's where silent treatment starts, when both of them stop talking to each other. But neither of them pause to examine their own contribution. Years later, the marriage reaches a breaking point. They sit with a counselor who asks a very simple question. What role do you think you have played in this pattern? The room goes quiet. At first, both resist. But slowly something shifts. The husband admits, perhaps, that he often dismissed his wife's concerns because he felt criticized. The wife perhaps admits that her frustration sometimes came out as harsh criticism rather than vulnerability. And for the first time, they are not blaming each other. They were examining themselves, and something remarkable happens in that process. The tension softens because responsibility changes the emotional atmosphere of a conversation. Blame creates distance. Responsibility creates possibilities. Blame freezes a relationship. Responsibility gives it a chance to evolve. So this pattern is also applicable in friendships as well. A friend doesn't reply to a message, then another message is sent, then another week passes. The ego immediately fills this silence with a story. They're ignoring me. So the response becomes colder and more distance develops in that relationship. And there's more sort of explanations and defensive remarks about why the other one is behaving like this. Now, the other friend who senses the distance withdraws even further. And within weeks, the friendship is strained. And when they finally speak, the conversation becomes like a courtroom. You always do this. You never care. You're selfish. You're dramatic. You notice what's been happening there. Instead of a simple conversation, the ego interprets the whole situation differently and it becomes a moral battle between two people. And that's how friendships dissolve. People become distant and they may end up sort of not talking to each other for the rest of their lives. And this is something which I've personally seen in many relationships and friendships. The ego turns the conversation into courtroom. It becomes a point of, the prosecution and the defense. Because in the courtroom, you have to prove that the other person is wrong. In a mirror, you face yourself. And this is why I've mentioned many times when people debate, even if it's religious debates, they're there just to prove each other wrong. Nobody's there to soften each other up and to forge an alliance to bring the hearts together. You see this pattern in families as well. Brothers who stop speaking to each other for years, parents and children who grow emotionally distant, extended families divided by arguments that happened decades earlier. And sometimes it just goes on from one generation to another generation. The younger generation, who may not have even been sort of involved in the original argument, they carry that same grudge and hatred in their hearts because they've been brainwashed by the older generation. They've been told that the other side is wrong, they are evil, they're manipulative, you should stay away from them. And the children carry that same program in their mind, or shall I say brainwashing, onto perhaps the next generation until they grow so apart that they no longer know each other and the relationship is dissolved. This is a very common picture that we see across generations and families who are probably close at one stage, but over a period of time, those alliances, those sort of friendships disappear. And this, I was reading another example recently where one particular woman reconciled with her estranged father after 30 years. A woman sort of reconciled with her estranged father after 30 years. She stayed away from him because her parents divorced, and her mother brainwashed her for decades that your father is evil, he's this, he's that, stay away from him. The mother played the victim card, and she put her software onto the daughter, and the daughter grew up to a large majority of her adult life until, I don't know what happened, she reached out or the father reached out, and when she reconciled with the father, she realized that he wasn't such a bad person after all. Or maybe he was 30 years ago, but he's changed. But the fact of the matter is that she lost out of 30 years of companionship with her father because her mother told her that her father was an evil person and she should stay away from him. And she just took on that programming and let that shape her own future destiny, which was based on this huge gulf distance with her own biological father. So each side often believes that they are defending their dignity. Each side believes that they were treated unfairly. But when nobody examines their own role, the conflict becomes permanent. And this is typical, as I said, between couples, families, friends. So some people would rather lose a relationship for 10 years than lose an argument for 10 seconds. I mean, those are the lucky ones if they reconcile after 10 years. If a relationship has been broken for 10 years, it's very unlikely to reconcile and for those same bonds to be formed again. Because once you've lived apart from somebody for 10 years, then you already realize that they no longer play a relevant role in your life anymore. So you can see how this same pattern plays out in public life as well. Every few years, a well-known public figure faces criticism. Something they said or did becomes controversial. The reaction that often appears first is deflection. I've been misunderstood. This is how they defend themselves. My words were taken out of context. This is a media attack. Sometimes those explanations do contain elements of truth, but occasionally something very different happens. A person steps forward and says something simple. I was wrong. No excuses. I was at a different place then. No deflection, just accountability. And something interesting happens when that occurs. The criticism softens. Respect increases because accountability signals that strength. Being responsible does not make you weak. It improves who you are by proving to others that you are strong enough to face reality without hiding behind excuses. Now consider another common situation in the workplace. An employee believes that they are capable of more, they believe that their ideas are better than the direction the organization is taking, but their career feels stuck. Promotions pass them by, recognition goes to others, and gradually a story forms. The management is biased, the company is political, they promote the wrong people, something is not right about this company, and they start forming these sort of excuses and explanations in their own sort of mind. Sometimes there may be some element of truth in it, but the ego's instinct is not to begin with self-examination. It does not ask, have I communicated my value clearly? Have I developed the leadership skills that are required to take me to the next level or for others to promote me? Have I built the relationships that matter in this organization? Those questions require self-introspection and humility, whereas blame doesn't require any of that. The opportunity for growth will only come when one asks a different type of a question and does some self-introspection. But obviously we're denied this opportunity because the ego is conditioned to keep asking the same one question. Who is responsible for this problem? Whereas the growth would have started if you asked a different question. What is the situation trying to teach me? What can I learn from this? This is what most people fail to do. So modern psychology explains this, that this ego distortion is so powerful that human beings are deeply invested in protecting a stable sense of identity. Once we see ourselves as competent or intelligent, we become attached to that particular image. When that image is being contradicted, tension appears in the mind. Psychologists call this cognitive dissonance. To reduce that tension, the mind often changes the explanation instead of confronting the truth. Instead of saying, I made a mistake, it says the situation forced my hand. Instead of saying, I handled that badly, it says, anyone would have reacted in the same way. Each explanation is just protecting identity, but that is also the very same thing that prevents your growth and the opportunity for you to learn from that, because growth begins exactly when blame ends. So responsibility is what you need to be adopting, not taking out the victim card, because the victim card is your biggest enemy. And this is something that old ancient thinkers understood this well, and they address this as self-accountability. It encourages a person to examine their own behavior before criticizing others. The Stoic philosophers taught something similar. Focus on what lies within your control rather than blaming external events. Both traditions recognize the same truth. The ego seeks comfort, character seeks truth. The ego protects identity, responsibility refines it. So the real question becomes very simple. When something goes wrong in your life, what is your first instinct? Do you search for someone to blame, or you search for something to learn from? It's because that small difference repeated over a period of time shapes the entire trajectory of your life, whereas the blame keeps you trapped in the past and stops you from actually growing. And if you're not growing, then you're constantly repeating that same cycle, the same patterns in all your relationships and all the events that happen in your life. This is why people who grow the most are not the ones who never make mistakes. They are the ones who are strong enough to admit them. They are the ones who learn from the mistakes, and they're never looking for alibis, excuses, or other scapegoats to blame for their mistakes.